I'm Mackenzie Wilson, 27, a graphic designer from Seattle with a story that still haunts me. When I was 15, my mother abandoned me at Denver International Airport so she could enjoy a luxurious Bora Bora vacation with her new husband, stepfather number 3. That day changed everything about who I am and how I see the world. What she never expected was how dramatically her selfish decision would eventually come back to reshape both our lives. Before I share how my own mother left me stranded at an airport, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever felt betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you. Growing up, it was always just mom and me. My father walked out when I was 3, leaving my mother Stephanie to raise me alone. He would occasionally send birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside, but those became less frequent as the years passed. By the time I was 10, they stopped completely. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a middle-class suburb outside Denver. Mom worked as a real estate agent, which meant her schedule was unpredictable. Some weeks she'd be home every night to help with homework and make dinner, while other times she'd be running open houses and showing properties until late, leaving me with microwaved meals and reminder notes on the fridge. My grandparents were our safety net. They lived just 20 minutes away and stepped in whenever Mom's work schedule got hectic. Grandma would pick me up from school, and their house became my second home. I had my own bedroom there with colorful walls and shelves full of books. Grandpa taught me chess and took me fishing on weekends. Those years were stable, predictable, secure. Everything changed when I was 10. Grandpa retired from his accounting job, and they decided to move to Florida. They'd been talking about it for years. The warm weather would help Grandpa's arthritis, and they'd bought a condo in a retirement community near Tampa. Mom assured me we would visit them every summer, but their absence left a gaping hole in our lives. Without my grandparents nearby, Mom and I became closer out of necessity. We had our rituals: Friday movie nights with takeout pizza, Saturday morning hikes in the summer, and hot chocolate on the porch swing during snowy Colorado winters. Despite her busy schedule, Mom prioritized these moments. She wasn't perfect, sometimes impatient and often exhausted, but I never doubted she loved me. What I didn't understand then was Mom's deep fear of being alone. She was beautiful, tall with auburn hair and a smile that could charm anyone. But behind that smile was a woman who couldn't seem to find happiness in herself. Men were drawn to her, and she cycled through boyfriends throughout my childhood. Some lasted weeks, others months, but none seemed to fill whatever emptiness she was trying to address. When I was 7, she met Brian at an open house. He was a pharmaceutical sales rep with a booming laugh and a convertible that I thought was the coolest thing ever. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony at a mountain resort. Brian moved into our house, bringing boxes of expensive shoes and golf clubs. He was nice enough to me, but he traveled frequently for work. When he was home, he and Mom would sometimes argue late into the night. Their fights started small, about bills or schedules, but escalated quickly into rehashing old grievances. 2 years later, they divorced. Mom cried for weeks, and I learned to make simple meals and do my own laundry. "It's just us again, Mac," she told me, using my childhood nickname. "We don't need anyone else." I believed her. The pattern repeated when I was 11. This time, the man was Rick, a high school history teacher with a quiet demeanor and a passion for documentary films. Their courtship was brief, and the wedding small. Rick was kind and tried to bond with me through weekend museum trips and conversations about books. He lasted 14 months before moving out, taking his documentary collection and leaving Mom in another emotional tailspin. "Men can't handle strong women," she told me after the second divorce. "Remember that, Mackenzie. Never dim your light for anyone." I nodded, though I wondered if there was more to these failed relationships than she admitted. I was 14 when Jason entered our lives. Unlike Brian or Rick, Jason was wealthy, a tech executive with stock options and a vacation home in Vail. He was 15 years older than Mom, divorced twice with no children, and had the confidence of someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. He drove a sleek black Audi and wore designer suits that made Brian's look cheap by comparison. From the beginning, Jason pursued Mom aggressively. He sent flowers to her office, took her to expensive restaurants, and surprised her with weekend getaways to places like Santa Fe and San Francisco. I was left with neighbors or alone if the trip was just overnight. Mom was intoxicated by his attention and the lifestyle he offered. "He makes me feel like a queen," she gushed after returning from a weekend in Aspen. "He says I deserve to be spoiled after everything I've been through." Within 6 months, Jason proposed with a diamond ring that caught the light from every angle. Mom immediately said yes. The wedding was planned for the following spring, a lavish affair at one of Denver's most exclusive venues. As the date approached, our home life transformed. First, we moved. Jason insisted our house wasn't suitable and bought a sprawling 5-bedroom in one of Denver's most upscale neighborhoods. My new room was twice the size of my old one, with a window seat and an ensuite bathroom. Under different circumstances, I might have been thrilled. Next came Mom's transformation. She changed her hair color from auburn to blonde because Jason mentioned he preferred blondes. Her wardrobe was replaced with designer clothes that Jason's personal shopper helped select. Even her speaking style changed. She adopted Jason's opinions on politics, art, and people as if they'd always been her own. Most concerning was how she changed around me. When it was just the two of us, she was still Mom, asking about school, laughing at our inside jokes. But whenever Jason was present, she became hyper-focused on his needs and reactions. If I talked too much at dinner, she'd give me a warning look. If I disagreed with Jason about anything, she'd pull me aside later to lecture me about making an effort and being grateful for our new life. Jason was never openly cruel to me, but his disinterest was palpable. He spoke to me like I was a business associate's child at a dinner party, polite but detached. He never asked about my interests, friends, or thoughts. When forced to interact with me, he'd resort to generic questions about school or awkward comments about my height. "Growing like a weed, aren't you?" The months before their wedding, tension built in our home. I felt increasingly like an outsider in my own life. Mom and Jason discussed future plans, travel destinations, potential investment properties, social events with his colleagues, and I was rarely factored into these conversations. When I pointed this out, Mom would assure me I was being oversensitive or that these were adult matters I didn't need to worry about. What hurt most was watching Mom willingly erase parts of herself to please Jason. She stopped seeing her realtor friends because Jason found them provincial. She gave up our Friday movie nights because Jason preferred dining out with his circle. Our Saturday hikes disappeared because Jason thought they were pointless without a proper destination like a country club or upscale restaurant. By the time they married, I barely recognized the woman who had raised me. She had become an accessory to Jason's life, beautiful, polished, and lacking any independent edges that might scratch his perfect surface. The spring break trip to California had been promised for months. It was supposed to be our thing, Mom and me exploring Los Angeles, spending 2 days at Disneyland, and visiting Universal Studios. When Jason entered the picture, he surprisingly supported the idea, even suggesting we stay at a higher-end hotel than Mom had initially planned. "Can I invite Amber?" I asked one night at dinner, referring to my best friend since 6th grade. Mom and I were eating alone as Jason was at a business dinner. "I don't see why not," Mom replied, scrolling through hotel options on her tablet. "We could get adjoining rooms. It would be fun for you to have someone your own age there." For weeks, the California trip was my light at the end of the tunnel. School had become increasingly difficult, not academically, but socially. Moving to a new neighborhood meant changing schools mid-year, and the girls at Lakeside Prep were a different breed from my old public school friends. They wore the right brands, vacationed in the right places, and somehow already knew which colleges they would attend. I was an outsider despite my new address and clothes. Amber was my only close friend who had stuck with me through the transition. Her parents were divorced but amicable, and she split time between their homes. She understood complicated family dynamics and never judged mine. When I told her about the California trip, she immediately asked her parents, who agreed she could join us. "We're going to have the best time," I told her during lunch period. Mom said we can do whatever rides we want at Disneyland while she relaxes at the hotel pool. Everything changed exactly 17 days before our scheduled departure. I was doing homework at the kitchen island when I heard Mom's key in the front door. Jason was with her, both of them laughing as they entered. I immediately sensed something was different. Mom had a giddy energy, and Jason looked unusually pleased with himself. "Mackenzie, honey, Jason has the most amazing surprise," Mom announced, setting her purse down. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement. Jason placed an envelope on the counter and slid it toward me with a self-satisfied smile. "Go ahead, open it." Inside were 2 brochures for an overwater bungalow in Bora Bora. The photos showed crystalline blue waters, private decks leading directly into the ocean, and luxurious interiors. "I don't understand," I said, looking between them. "Is this for after California?" Mom's smile faltered slightly. "Well, that's the thing, sweetie. Jason surprised me with this trip for our 6-month anniversary. It's the same week as spring break." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "But what about our California trip? With Amber? We've been planning it for months." "I know, and I feel terrible about the timing," Mom said, though her expression didn't match her words. "But this is a once-in-a-lifetime trip. The resort is usually booked years in advance, but Jason knows the owner." Jason placed his hand on Mom's shoulder, a gesture that seemed more possessive than affectionate. "I thought you'd be happy for your mother. She deserves some luxury after working so hard all these years." That comment ignited something in me, the implication that I should be grateful he was taking my mother away from me, breaking a promise we'd made months ago. "What about my spring break? What am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You could still go to California," Mom suggested, but her tone lacked conviction. "Alone? I'm 15. Well, what about Amber and her parents? Would they take you along?" Jason interjected, clearly eager to resolve this inconvenient problem. The argument that followed was the worst Mom and I had ever had. Voices were raised, tears were shed, and words were said that couldn't be taken back. Jason stood at the periphery, occasionally chiming in with comments that only escalated the tension. "You're being selfish," he told me during a moment when Mom had left the room. "Your mother has sacrificed everything for you. Now she has a chance at happiness, and you're trying to make her feel guilty." When Mom returned, her eyes were red but her resolve hardened. "I'm going on this trip with Jason, Mackenzie. I've earned it. We'll plan another California trip this summer." By the end of the night, a compromise was reached, though it felt more like a consolation prize. Mom called Amber's parents, who agreed to include me in their California plans. They would handle all the arrangements, and Mom would cover my expenses. "See? Problem solved," Jason said with the satisfaction of a man who had bought his way out of an inconvenience. For the next 2 weeks, I barely spoke to Mom. The betrayal felt too raw. She made half-hearted attempts to bridge the gap, buying my favorite snacks, asking about my day, but the excitement about Bora Bora always bubbled just beneath the surface of her forced contrition. Amber tried to cheer me up. "It'll still be awesome," she assured me. "My parents are super chill, and this way we don't have to worry about your mom wanting to do boring adult stuff." The morning of our departures arrived with a tense atmosphere. Our flights were leaving the same day, mine to Los Angeles with Amber's family at 11:30 a.m., theirs to Tahiti, connecting to Bora Bora, at 1:45 p.m. The plan was for Jason and Mom to drop me at the airport, where I would meet Amber and her parents at the check-in counter. I dragged my suitcase downstairs to find Mom checking her phone with a furrowed brow. "Everything okay?" I asked, more out of habit than genuine concern. She looked up, distracted. "Amber's mom just texted. They're running late, traffic accident on I-25. They should still make it, but they might cut it close." Jason appeared from the kitchen, car keys jingling impatiently in his hand. "We need to get going. I don't want to risk missing our connection in Los Angeles." The drive to Denver International was silent. I stared out the window at the familiar landscape, wondering why this betrayal hurt so much more than the parade of stepfathers or the broken promises that had come before. Perhaps because this time, Mom had actively chosen someone else's happiness over mine, not just had a relationship fail. When we arrived at the departures terminal, Jason pulled up to the curb and popped the trunk. "I'll wait with the car," he said. "Stephanie, don't be too long. We still need to park and get through security ourselves." The unease that had been building in my stomach intensified as Mom walked me into the terminal, checking her watch repeatedly. The airport was bustling with spring break travelers, families with young children, college students in university sweatshirts, elderly couples moving carefully through the chaos. Mom and I approached the airline counter where I checked my bag and received my boarding pass. The agent smiled at me and handed back my student ID. "Where are your travel companions?" she asked pleasantly. "They're running a bit late," Mom answered before I could speak. "They'll be here shortly." We moved away from the counter toward the security checkpoint, the invisible boundary between those traveling and those staying behind. Mom checked her watch again and glanced toward the entrance. "I don't see Amber's family yet," I said, scanning the crowds. "They'll be here soon," Mom replied, but she was looking at her phone, not the terminal entrance. "Jason just texted. He's getting anxious about finding parking and making our flight." A knot formed in my stomach. "You're not leaving until they get here, right?" Mom finally looked at me, but something in her expression had changed. There was a detachment there I hadn't seen before, a calculation happening behind her eyes. "Honey, you're checked in already. You're 15, not 5. Amber's family will be here any minute according to her mom's texts." She adjusted her designer handbag on her shoulder. "Jason and I really need to get going to make our connection. But what if they don't make it in time? What if something happened?" My voice rose with the first flutterings of panic. Mom glanced around as if worried someone might overhear us. "Mackenzie, don't make a scene. You'll be fine. If there's any problem, the airport staff can help you." She leaned in to give me a quick, perfunctory hug. "I love you. Have fun in California. I'll bring you back something nice from Bora Bora." And then she was walking away, her blonde hair bouncing with each determined step, not looking back even once. I stood frozen, my boarding pass clutched in my hand, watching my mother choose a vacation over my safety. I told myself not to panic. Amber's family would arrive soon. This was just Mom being selfish as usual. I found a seat near the security checkpoint and texted Amber. "Me, at airport. Where are you guys?" Amber, still stuck in traffic. "Dad's going crazy. Maybe 30 minutes away?" Me, Mom and Jason left already for their flight. Amber, what? Alone? Me, yeah. She said you'd be here soon. Amber, we're trying. Traffic's insane. I waited, watching the minutes tick by on my phone. 10 minutes. 20. 30. I tried calling Mom, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted her. Me, Amber's family still not here. Getting worried. Me, Mom? Please answer. Me, are you really going to just leave me here alone? 45 minutes after Mom left, my phone rang. It was Amber. "Mackenzie, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice tight with stress. "We're not going to make it. Dad's car started overheating, and we had to pull over. We're waiting for a tow truck now. Mom's freaking out about you being alone." The last thread of hope snapped. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice small and strange to my own ears. "Mom's calling the airline. She's trying to see if they can help. Can you find an airport employee or something? Like security?" After hanging up, I sat paralyzed, watching families and couples move through the terminal with purpose and destination. My own purpose had evaporated, leaving me stranded in more ways than one. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom, finally. "Mom, you'll be fine. Airport staff can help." We couldn't miss our connection. See you in a week. The casual dismissal of my situation broke something inside me. Tears welled up, but I fought them back, not wanting to become a spectacle. With shaking hands, I approached a uniformed airport employee near the security checkpoint. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely audible. "I need help." The woman, middle-aged with kind eyes, looked at me with increasing concern as I explained my situation. Her name tag read Patricia. "Your mother left you here alone," she repeated, as if unable to comprehend what I was saying. "And your friend's family can't make it?" I nodded, the tears finally breaking free. Patricia put a gentle hand on my shoulder and guided me toward a small office area away from the main concourse. She spoke into her radio, using official-sounding codes I didn't understand. Within minutes, another employee arrived, followed by a man in a suit who introduced himself as the terminal manager. "This is a serious situation," he said, his expression grave. "Unaccompanied minors can't just be left at the airport without proper arrangements. I need to contact airport security and possibly child services." The words child services sent a fresh wave of panic through me. "I just need to get to California," I insisted. "My friend's family was supposed to take me." Patricia stayed with me while the others made calls. She brought me a bottle of water and a granola bar from her own bag. "It's going to be okay," she assured me, though her expression suggested otherwise. Airport security arrived, a stern-looking officer who asked me detailed questions about Mom, Jason, and our living situation. I answered mechanically, still unable to fully process what was happening. He tried calling Mom repeatedly, but her phone remained off or unanswered. "We have protocols for situations like this," he finally said, though his tone suggested this was not a common occurrence. "I need to contact Child Protective Services since you're a minor who's been left without supervision or designated guardianship." By early evening, I was sitting in a small conference room at the airport with a social worker named Ms. Bennett. She had gentle eyes and spoke to me in a calm, measured voice that somehow made everything feel both more real and more surreal. "We're reaching out to your emergency contacts," she explained. "Do you have grandparents or other relatives who might be able to come get you?" "My grandparents," I said, suddenly remembering. "They live in Florida now." "Tampa." Ms. Bennett nodded encouragingly. "That's good. Do you have their phone number?" I didn't, but I knew their address and my grandfather's full name. This was enough for them to be located. While we waited, Ms. Bennett explained that I would need to spend the night somewhere safe. "Normally we would place you in emergency foster care," she said, "but given the circumstances and the fact that we're actively locating your grandparents, we've arranged a room at the airport hotel. I'll be staying in the connecting room to ensure your safety." That night in the sterile airport hotel room was the lowest point of my young life. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the jeans and sweatshirt I had chosen for the flight to California, staring at the generic landscape painting on the wall. The reality of what had happened kept hitting me in waves. My mother had abandoned me for a vacation. She had chosen a luxury overwater bungalow over her daughter's safety and well-being. Through the thin wall, I could hear Ms. Bennett on the phone, her voice rising and falling as she spoke with various authorities. I caught fragments: mother unreachable, grandparents arranging travel, child left at airport. I checked my phone obsessively, but there were no more messages from Mom. Amber had texted several times, frantic with worry. I assured her I was safe and would call tomorrow. I didn't have the emotional energy to explain further. As I finally lay down to sleep, fully clothed on top of the hotel comforter, I made a silent promise to myself: I would never allow myself to be this vulnerable again. I would never give anyone, not even my mother, the power to hurt me this deeply. It was the first night of my new life, a life where trust would be earned, not automatically granted, even to those who were supposed to love me most. I woke to gentle knocking on my hotel room door. For a moment, I didn't recognize where I was: the unfamiliar room, the clothes I'd slept in, the strange emptiness in my chest. Then it all came rushing back. Mom. The airport. Abandonment. Ms. Bennett stood in the doorway, already dressed and holding a paper bag. I brought you some breakfast, she said, setting it on the small desk. There's good news. Your grandparents booked flights last night. They should arrive around noon. Relief washed over me. Grandma and Grandpa were coming. They would fix this somehow. Have you heard from my mom? I asked, though I already knew the answer from Ms. Bennett's expression. Not directly, she replied carefully. But the authorities have confirmed she and her husband boarded their connecting flight to Tahiti. They're likely in Bora Bora by now. The knowledge that Mom had actually gone through with the vacation, had actually flown to a tropical paradise while I spent the night in an airport hotel with a social worker, hardened something inside me. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of poor judgment. This was a deliberate choice. The morning passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. A police officer came to take an official statement. He was professional but couldn't hide his disgust when I explained the circumstances. In my 20 years on the force, I've seen some selfish parenting, but this, he trailed off, shaking his head. Ms. Bennett explained that my case had been officially reported to Child Protective Services and would be investigated. Your grandparents are applying for temporary emergency custody, she said. Given the circumstances, it should be granted quickly. Around noon, I was brought to a private waiting area in the airport. When the door opened and my grandparents walked in, I broke down completely. Grandma rushed forward, enveloping me in her familiar lavender-scented embrace. Grandpa stood behind her, his face a mixture of fury and heartbreak. My sweet girl, Grandma murmured into my hair. We came as soon as we heard. We're here now. Grandpa's voice was gruff with emotion. You're coming home with us. To Florida. Today. There were more meetings, more paperwork. My grandparents spoke with airport security, police, and child services representatives. Their anger was palpable but controlled, channeled into productive action rather than helpless rage. As we prepared to leave for their hotel, we would fly to Tampa the next day, my phone rang. It was Mom's ringtone. My hand trembled as I showed the screen to my grandparents. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, Grandma said gently. But I needed to hear what she would say. I needed to know if there was any explanation that could possibly make sense of what she had done. Hello? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, older, harder. Mackenzie? Finally. Mom's voice had the slightly delayed quality of an international call. In the background, I could hear waves lapping and faint music. I've been trying to reach you. Are you in California? The casual tone, as if she were simply checking in on a normal trip, ignited my anger. No, Mom. I'm not in California. Amber's family had car trouble and never made it to the airport. You left me completely alone. A pause. Well, I'm sure the airline helped you. You're 15, not a child. The police were called, I said flatly. And child services. Grandma and Grandpa flew in from Florida. I spent last night in a hotel with a social worker. Another, longer pause. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, defensive, with an edge of fear. You're making this into a much bigger deal than it is, Mackenzie. These things happen. You're old enough to handle a little adversity. A little adversity? I repeated, incredulous. You abandoned me at an airport. I did not abandon you, she snapped. Jason thought you'd be fine. We paid for your California trip. It's not my fault Amber's family couldn't get it together. In the background, I heard Jason's voice, though I couldn't make out his words. Mom's voice became muffled, as if she'd covered the phone. When she returned, her tone was clipped. Look, I have to go. We have a couples massage scheduled. We'll sort this out when I get back. It's really not as dramatic as you're making it. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at my phone in disbelief. Grandpa gently took it from my hand. That was her? What did she say? I recounted the conversation, watching their expressions darken with each detail. She's always been selfish, Grandma said quietly to Grandpa. But this? I never thought she would go this far. Grandpa put his arm around my shoulders. You're coming to live with us, Mackenzie. No discussion. We already talked to our lawyer in Florida. We're filing for custody as soon as we get back. That night, in yet another hotel room but with the comforting presence of my grandparents in the connecting room, I tried to process the seismic shift in my life. In the span of 24 hours, I had lost my mother, not to death or disease, but to her own callous self-interest, and gained a new path forward. I thought about our house in Denver, my clothes and books, my school. None of it seemed important anymore. The only thing that mattered was that the people who truly loved me were now beside me, ready to catch me when I fell. The next morning, as we boarded our flight to Tampa, Grandpa handed me a new journal. For your fresh start, he said. Sometimes writing things down helps make sense of them. On the first page, I wrote a single sentence: today is the first day of my life without her. Florida was as different from Denver as could be imagined, flat where Colorado was mountainous, humid where home had been dry, green and lush where I was accustomed to urban landscapes punctuated by distant peaks. My grandparents lived in a retirement community called Palm Haven, in a modest 3-bedroom house with a screened lanai and a small swimming pool that Grandpa maintained with religious dedication. Starting over at Jefferson High School in mid-March was disorienting. I entered as the new girl when social groups and friendships were already firmly established. The curious glances and whispered conversations behind hands were familiar from my last school transition, but this time felt heavier. I wasn't just the new girl, I was the girl whose mother had abandoned her at an airport. Somehow, the story had spread. Perhaps through the efficient grapevine of a retirement community where my grandparents' neighbors had pieced together my sudden arrival, or maybe through the natural telepathy of teenage social networks. Whatever the source, by my third day, I heard a girl in the bathroom say to her friend, "That's the one whose mom ditched her to go on vacation with her boyfriend." Rather than correct her that Jason was actually my stepfather, I pushed past them and locked myself in a stall until the tears subsided. Grandma and Grandpa tried their best to create normalcy. They converted their home office into a bedroom for me, painted it my favorite shade of sage green, and took me shopping for new clothes and supplies. They attended every school meeting, helped with homework, and never once made me feel like a burden. But living in a retirement community as a teenager came with its own challenges. The average age of our neighbors was 72. Community rules prohibited skateboarding, playing music outdoors, or having friends over after 8 p.m. The nearest mall was a 30-minute drive, and without a car or many friends, my world contracted to school, home, and the weekly therapy sessions Grandma insisted would help me process my trauma. Dr. Levine, my therapist, had a small office decorated with plants and abstract paintings. She never pushed me to talk about Mom before I was ready, instead helping me navigate the immediate challenges of my new life. Abandonment creates a unique kind of wound, she explained during one session. It's not just about the physical act of being left somewhere, but the message it sends about your worth in the eyes of the person who left. Through these sessions, I began to understand that Mom's actions reflected her own brokenness, not my value. This was intellectually helpful but emotionally insufficient. Knowing why someone hurt you doesn't stop the pain. Mom's calls were infrequent after they returned from Bora Bora. When she did call, our conversations were strained and superficial. She never directly acknowledged or apologized for what she'd done, instead referring to it obliquely as that airport situation or the misunderstanding before my trip. The legal proceedings happened quickly. Given the circumstances and Mom's apparent disinterest in fighting for custody, my grandparents were granted full legal guardianship. Mom agreed to pay child support, which arrived sporadically at first and then, after Grandpa's lawyer got involved, with grudging regularity. Jason remained in the background of these conversations, a shadowy influence I could feel but rarely hear directly. Once, when I answered Grandma's phone and he happened to be with Mom, he took the receiver. "Mackenzie, I hope you've gained some perspective on the situation by now," he said without preamble. "Your mother's been under a lot of stress with all this legal nonsense. You should know how much this is hurting her. I hung up without responding, hands shaking with rage at his audacity. Summer came, bringing sweltering Florida heat and the promise of a visit from Mom. She had called to say she would spend a week with us in July, without Jason. I approached the visit with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. Perhaps away from his influence, she would be more like her old self. Perhaps she would finally acknowledge what she'd done and truly apologize. 2 days before her scheduled arrival, she called again. "Honey, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to postpone my visit," she said, her voice overly bright. "Jason surprised me with a Mediterranean cruise. Can you believe it? It's for our 1-year anniversary. We'll be gone all month, but I promise I'll come in August instead." Grandma found me an hour later, still sitting motionless by the phone. When I told her what happened, her expression hardened in a way I'd never seen. "That's enough," she said firmly. "I've tried to avoid speaking ill of your mother, but this pattern cannot continue. She cannot keep hurting you like this." August came and went without a visit. So did Thanksgiving and Christmas. Mom sent gifts, expensive but impersonal items that suggested a store clerk had selected them based on my age rather than any knowledge of my preferences. The cards were signed Love, Mom and Jason in her handwriting. Through it all, I survived. More than survived, I began to rebuild. Jefferson High had a strong arts program, and I discovered a talent for graphic design. My teachers encouraged me to enter competitions, and when I won second place in a statewide contest, Grandpa framed the certificate and hung it prominently in the living room. I made a few close friends, not a large social circle, but genuine connections with people like Zoe, whose parents had divorced bitterly, and Marcus, who lived with his grandfather after his parents' death in a car accident. We formed our own little family of the somewhat broken, finding strength in shared experience. By junior year, I had established myself academically. My GPA placed me in the top 10% of my class, and I joined the yearbook committee as layout designer. College began to seem like a real possibility rather than a distant dream. Grandpa, who had quietly been setting aside money since my arrival, revealed a modest college fund. "It's not enough for anywhere fancy," he admitted. "But it's a start. And there are scholarships, financial aid. We'll figure it out together." High school graduation arrived on a humid May evening. As I sat among my classmates in my cap and gown, I scanned the audience. Grandma and Grandpa were there, of course, beaming with pride. So were Zoe's parents, who had become like a second family, driving me to school events when my grandparents couldn't and including me in their holiday celebrations. Mom had promised to come. "Nothing will keep me away," she'd sworn during our last phone call. But as the ceremony progressed and my name was called to receive my diploma, I accepted the reality I had suspected all along: she wasn't there. Later I would learn she and Jason were in Paris that week, a spontaneous trip because he had business in Europe and suggested she join him. That summer, I worked 2 jobs, one at a local print shop where I learned more about design, and another at an ice cream parlor to save additional money for college. The University of Florida had accepted me with a partial scholarship, and I was determined to make it work financially. The night before I left for college, Grandpa and I sat on the lanai, watching the sunset turn the sky vivid shades of orange and pink. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "You've overcome more at 18 than most people face in a lifetime." "I couldn't have done it without you and Grandma," I replied, meaning it with every fiber of my being. He squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you know, Mackenzie. Always have been. What happened with your mother, that would have broken many people. But not you. You took that pain and built something from it." His words stayed with me as I navigated college, the friendships, classes, challenges, and triumphs that filled the next 4 years. I majored in visual communications with a minor in psychology, understanding perhaps better than most how human connections could both heal and harm. I dated occasionally but cautiously, always vigilant for signs that I might be valued conditionally, as I had been by Mom. This hyper-awareness made romantic relationships difficult, but therapy helped me recognize when my guardedness was protective versus when it was preventing genuine connection. Through it all, Mom remained a peripheral figure in my life, occasional calls, birthday cards, vague promises of visits that rarely materialized. She and Jason were still together, traveling extensively and renovating a vacation home in Arizona. I learned to expect little and thus was rarely disappointed. The airport abandonment had shaped me irrevocably. I became someone who prepared extensively for every contingency, who never fully trusted that plans wouldn't change at the last minute, who always kept a small part of myself in reserve even with those closest to me. But I also became someone who recognized genuine care when it was offered, who valued reliability above charisma, who understood that love was demonstrated through consistent presence rather than grand gestures or empty promises. 5 years after that day at Denver International, I was a college graduate with a promising job offer from a Seattle design firm. My life was taking shape in ways that had nothing to do with Mom's absence or presence. I had built something entirely my own, something that couldn't be abandoned or taken away. I had been in Seattle for 3 months when the call came. It was a Tuesday evening in October, and I was working late at Horizon Design, finalizing layouts for a client presentation the next day. When my phone lit up with Mom's name, I almost didn't answer. Our last conversation, a brief and unsatisfying exchange on my birthday, had left me emotionally drained. Something, intuition, perhaps, made me pick up. "Mackenzie?" Her voice sounded different, fragile and ragged, missing the bright, artificially cheerful tone she usually adopted with me. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately on alert. "Everything," she said, and then began to cry, not delicate tears but harsh, wrenching sobs that sounded wrenched from deep inside her. When she could finally speak, the story emerged in fragments. Jason had left her for his 26-year-old personal trainer. They had been having an affair for months, apparently. He wanted a divorce. He was keeping the house in Denver, the condo in Vail. She had 30 days to move out. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice small and lost. "I don't have anywhere to go." The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother, who had abandoned me, was now herself abandoned. Part of me, a dark part one wasn't proud of, felt a vindictive satisfaction. But another part remembered the mom from before Jason, the one who made hot chocolate on snowy days and taught me to stand up for myself. "What are you thinking of doing?" I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral. A pause. "I was thinking, maybe Florida? To be closer to you? I could get a real estate license there, start over. Maybe we could repair things between us." The request hung in the air, enormous and fragile. She wasn't directly asking to stay with me, but the implication was clear. She was reaching out for the safety net I had never had when I needed it most. "I'm not in Florida anymore," I said finally. "I live in Seattle now. I got a job at a design firm after graduation." "Oh." The deflation in her voice was palpable. "I didn't know. You moved across the country." "Yes. 3 months ago." The fact that she didn't know such a fundamental detail about my life spoke volumes about our relationship. Another silence stretched between us. Then, would it be possible for me to visit you? In Seattle? Just to talk, to see you. I understand if you don't want to. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at me to refuse. This woman had caused me more pain than anyone in my life. She had broken my trust in the most fundamental way possible. Why should I open myself to potential hurt again? But something else, a curiosity, perhaps, about who we might be to each other now, or a need for closure I hadn't fully acknowledged, made me agree to a visit. 1 week, I told her. No promises beyond that. 3 weeks later, I met my mother at a coffee shop near Pike Place Market. I'd chosen a public location deliberately, wanting the safety of neutral territory and the ability to leave if things became too difficult. She looked older than I remembered, the carefully maintained blonde now streaked with gray, lines around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. She was still beautiful but in a more fragile, authentic way than during her time with Jason. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect manicure, replaced by a simple sweater and jeans, minimal makeup. "Mackenzie," she said, rising from her table when she saw me. She moved as if to hug me, then stopped herself, reading my body language. "Thank you for meeting me." We sat across from each other, two adults now rather than mother and child. I ordered a latte, she asked for green tea. Small talk filled the first awkward minutes, the weather in Seattle, rainy, my apartment, small but with a view of Puget Sound, her flight, bumpy. Finally, she set down her tea and looked at me directly. "I don't know how to begin to apologize for what I did to you." "I'm sorry" seems woefully inadequate. "It is," I agreed, my voice steadier than I felt. "But it would be a start." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I am sorry, Mackenzie. So deeply sorry. I was a terrible mother to you when you needed me most. I abandoned you, physically at the airport, but emotionally long before that. There's no excuse for what I did." But then, predictably, she began to offer excuses anyway. "I was under Jason's influence. He had this way of making everything he wanted seem reasonable, essential. He made me believe that taking that trip was my right, that you were old enough to handle it." "I was 15, I said flatly. "And you left me alone in an airport." She flinched. "I know. It was unforgivable." "Then don't ask for forgiveness," I replied. "I'm not sure I can give that. What I want is understanding. I want to know how my mother, who used to check my closet for monsters and taught me to ride a bike, could walk away from me that day without looking back." What followed was a 3-hour conversation that laid bare the dysfunction and damage of the past 7 years. Mom spoke of her fear of aging alone, how Jason had represented security and status she'd never had. She described his subtle manipulation, the way he isolated her from friends and family, controlled their finances, made major decisions without real consultation. "He never wanted you around," she admitted, staring into her third cup of tea. "From the beginning, he saw you as an impediment to the life he wanted with me. He was always finding ways to exclude you, to create distance between us." "And you let him," I said, the old hurt rising fresh and raw. "You chose him." "I did," she acknowledged, not trying to deflect. "I can't change that. I believed I needed him more than anything. I was wrong, and by the time I realized it, I'd already lost you." She told me about therapy she'd started after a particularly ugly fight with Jason 6 months earlier, how she'd begun to recognize the patterns of codependency and emotional manipulation in their relationship. "I've learned that I've spent my whole adult life looking for someone to complete me, to make me feel secure," she said. "I jumped from relationship to relationship because I was terrified of being alone. And in the process, I failed the one person who truly needed me, you." Her vulnerability was unexpected and disarming. This wasn't the defensive, self-justifying mother I had prepared myself to face. This was someone attempting, however imperfectly, to take responsibility. As the coffee shop began to fill with the after-work crowd, I suggested we walk. We strolled along the waterfront, the conversation continuing in fits and starts, painfully honest in a way we had never been with each other. "What do you want now?" I finally asked as we stood looking out at the ferries crossing Elliott Bay. "From me, from this visit?" She turned to face me, her expression raw with emotion. "I want a chance to know my daughter, the amazing woman you've become despite my failures. I want to be in your life in whatever way you'll allow. I don't expect forgiveness or forget what I did. I just want an opportunity to show you who I am now, and maybe, someday, to earn back some small measure of your trust." Her words contained no demands, no expectations, no attempt to rush the process or force intimacy that wasn't there. It was perhaps the most genuine thing she had ever said to me. "I can't promise anything," I told her honestly. "There's too much damage. But I'm willing to try small steps. Phone calls. Occasional visits. We start there and see what happens." The relief in her eyes was palpable. that's more than I deserve. Thank you. Before she left Seattle, we established boundaries and expectations, weekly phone calls, honesty even when difficult, respect for each other's separate lives. Mom rented an apartment in Tampa, not far from my grandparents, and began rebuilding her real estate career. I remained in Seattle, advancing at Horizon Design and slowly developing a social circle that included Tyler, a software engineer I'd met through work. The process of rebuilding our relationship was neither quick nor easy. There were difficult conversations, painful memories resurfaced, moments when old patterns threatened to re-emerge. But gradually, incrementally, we established a new kind of relationship, not the uncomplicated mother-daughter bond that might have been, but something more complex and, in its way, more honest. A year after her first visit, Mom came to Seattle again. This time, I invited her to stay in my guest room rather than a hotel. During that visit, she met Tyler, by then an important part of my life. Watching them interact, her careful respect for my choices, his protective warmth toward me, I glimpsed a possible future where the various pieces of my life might coexist, not perfectly but peacefully. That night, after Tyler had gone home and Mom and I were washing dishes side by side, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me, Mackenzie? Truly forgive me?" I considered the question carefully before answering. I think forgiveness isn't a single moment but a process. There are days when I've already forgiven you, and days when the hurt feels as fresh as it did at the airport. Maybe that's how it will always be. She nodded, accepting this complex truth without protest. I can live with that. I just want you to know that the day I walked away from you was the worst mistake of my life, and I'll spend the rest of my days trying to make amends. For the first time, I believed her completely. Not because the past had changed or because the damage had been undone, but because we were both finally seeing each other clearly, without illusions or denial. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation, but it was something real, a beginning, not an ending. Today, at 27, I look out from my condo balcony at the Seattle skyline, a cup of coffee warming my hands against the morning chill. 12 years have passed since that day at Denver International Airport. In many ways, I'm still that abandoned 15-year-old girl, shaped permanently by the experience of being left behind. But I'm also so much more. I'm a senior graphic designer at one of Seattle's most respected firms, specializing in nonprofit campaigns that help vulnerable communities. My work has won awards and, more importantly to me, has helped organizations that protect children from the kind of abandonment and trauma I experienced. Tyler and I have been together for 4 years, living together for 2. He knows every detail of my story and understands the triggers that sometimes surface, my need for explicit reassurance before he travels for work, my tendency to overprepare for every contingency, my occasional emotional withdrawal when I feel vulnerable. He doesn't take these personally or try to fix me but offers steady support and consistent presence. My relationship with Mom exists in a space of cautious care. She still lives in Tampa, has her own real estate business now, and has been dating a kind, unassuming high school history teacher named Mark for the past 3 years. We talk weekly, see each other 3 or 4 times a year, and maintain clear boundaries that allow us both to feel safe in the relationship. Grandma lives in assisted living now, her mind still sharp but her body increasingly frail. Grandpa passed away 2 years ago from heart failure. At his funeral, Mom and I stood side by side, grieving the man who had stepped in when he was most needed. "He never stopped believing you would find your way back to me," Mom whispered as we watched the casket being lowered into the ground. Even when I had given up hope. The most profound healing has come through therapy. After years of individual work with Dr. Levine in Florida and later with Dr. Chen in Seattle, I finally suggested to Mom that we try family therapy together. For the past year, we've met monthly via video with Dr. Westbrook, who specializes in mother-daughter trauma. These sessions have been challenging but transformative. In one particularly difficult session, Mom finally acknowledged the full extent of her emotional abandonment, not just the airport incident, but all the ways she had prioritized her relationships with men over her connection with me throughout my childhood. I was trying to fill a void that couldn't be filled by anyone else, she admitted. I thought finding the right man would make me whole, would make us a complete family. Instead, I broke the family we already had. That admission was a turning point. Not because it erased the past, but because it named the truth we had both been dancing around for years. There was power in that naming, in the mutual acknowledgement of what had been lost and what might still be built. The healing hasn't been linear. There are still moments when old pain surfaces unexpectedly, when Mom mentions a trip she's planning with Mark and I feel that familiar knot of abandonment form in my stomach, or when I see mothers and daughters shopping together with easy intimacy I'm not sure we'll ever recapture. But these moments no longer derail me completely. I've learned to acknowledge them, sit with the discomfort, and then continue forward. Perhaps the most significant measure of my healing is how I've chosen to integrate this experience into my identity and purpose. I volunteer monthly at a youth center for teens facing family crises. I don't share my story with every kid who walks through the door, but when I see that particular look, the one that says the person who was supposed to protect me has failed, I sometimes offer my experience as evidence that abandonment doesn't have to define your future. Last month, Mom joined me for one of these volunteer sessions. Watching her speak honestly to a group of teenagers about her failures as a mother and the work of rebuilding what was broken was one of the most powerful moments of my adult life. Not because it erased what happened, but because it demonstrated how completely we had both been transformed by confronting it. Tyler proposed last week, on a hike overlooking Puget Sound. As I consider building my own family, I carry both caution and hope. I understand better than most how fragile family bonds can be, how easily they can fracture under pressure. But I also know how resilience can be forged in that brokenness, how strength can emerge from vulnerability. The truth is, being abandoned by my mother at 15 taught me lessons I might never have learned otherwise. I discovered my capacity to survive what I had most feared. I learned that family can be found and created in unexpected places. I developed a finely tuned radar for authenticity in relationships and a deep appreciation for people who show up consistently, without drama or conditions. These are hard-won insights, paid for at a price I would never choose to pay again. But they are mine now, integral to who I am and how I move through the world. The abandoned girl at the airport is still part of me, but she's no longer the whole story. As I finish writing this, I'm preparing for Mom's visit next week. We'll celebrate her birthday with a small dinner at my place, just Mom, Mark, Tyler, and me. It won't be perfect. There will be moments of awkwardness, perhaps even tension. But we'll be together, imperfectly but intentionally, each of us doing our best to honor both the pain of the past and the possibility of the present. That, I think, is what healing looks like, not the absence of scars, but learning to live with them, not forgetting the past, but refusing to be imprisoned by it, not pretending the break never happened, but appreciating the unique strength of what has been mended. If you've stayed with my story until now, perhaps you've experienced your own version of abandonment or betrayal by someone who should have protected you. If so, I hope you found some reflection of your own journey in mine. The path to healing isn't straight or simple, but it is possible. Sometimes the deepest wounds lead to the most profound growth, and the places where we've been broken become the sources of our greatest strength. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you in any way, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear that abandonment isn't the end of their story either. Leave a comment about how you've overcome betrayal in your own life, or what helped you heal from family trauma. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories of resilience and recovery, and remember, your worth was never determined by those who couldn't see it clearly. Take care of yourselves, and of each other.